So I want you to imagine that we're somewhere in southwestern Russia, perhaps Rostov-on-Don or Penza, two relatively known cities. And a friend of yours, a male friend, has just received a phone call from his local police station. It's regarding a routine document check, he says. He just has to go in and clarify some things. But when he gets there, there's two military recruiters awaiting him. He's taken to a recruitment office and beaten severely on things like his liver and kidneys, and all until he agrees to sign up. But worse still, it turns out that he was put forward as a suggestion by his own neighbour, your own neighbour, in return for some money. And before you know it, hours later, he's just gone. This is Putin's Russia and the voluntary recruitment system in 2026. Men called in false pretexts, beaten in recruitment offices. Neighbours paid $1,300 or more to bring men to the front. And videos circulating on social media of spouses, women, families all crying as they're forced to join. And all the while, the Interior Ministry threatens legal consequences for anyone who shares this footage. But simultaneously, while that's happening at the bottom, at the very top, Moscow's Vladimir Putin is sitting at a military briefing flanked by two Russian flags and being praised about his military's performance. All the while, those around him have actually only been in the position less than a week. We are continuing to improve the structures of the defense ministry, he is told. But this is not the story that's actually happening. And the story I want to tell you is very much how bad Putin's military situation is becoming, not only from the bottom up, but from the top down. And it's squeezing him completely. Let's get into it. This is the Global Gambit. How you going, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, where I wanted to return to the political military dynamics that we're seeing here, but especially the military pressure mounting on Putin when it comes to the pencil-like effect, his growing recruitment problem, and what looks like almost an inevitable partial, he's going to say, but realistically full mobilization in the fall. It's August right now. Maybe not much will happen, but certainly it's important to look ahead and take stock of where things are. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Russia can sustain this war without a formal mobilization? I look forward to hearing what you have to say. Now, still, Russia's official position is that the recruitment is, of course, voluntary. That men are signing up freely. That these signing bonuses, often more than an entire year's salary, and in some cases $80,000 or more, are attracting willing soldiers in sufficient numbers that they are ready to fight for the fatherland. But the reality on the ground, of course, is a very different story. Military recruiters in smaller Russian towns and cities are detaining men on the street willy-nilly. And this isn't just data from second-hand sources. I have friends of mine who tell me this on a weekly basis. It's outside of their places of work. It's under the pretext of routine document checks. Once inside, though, a recruitment office, these men are threatened or beaten until they sign up. Lawyers and rights workers documenting the practice say that most of the relatives they've spoken to agreed to sign a contract only when law enforcement officials threatened to plant drugs on them and arrest them on the spot. And, I had a couple of friends of mine from a larger city in southern Siberia where this was so prevalent that they've actually tried to flee the country in case of this mobilization. It is such a reality of Putin's Russia that they are going to impose false drug charges on you as a way to make you fight for your country. This city that I mentioned in the introduction, Penza, this is where the practice has been most visible. Advertisements hang in residential buildings across the city, and the wording is pretty straightforward along as it is across the country. And if you bring a friend to the recruitment center, then you get like 100,000 rubles. That's $1,300 just for suggesting someone else to sign up. Essentially, Russia is paying neighbors to inform on and deliver their own community members, specifically men, of course, to the military. Now, similar programs like this exist in places like Tatarstan, in the Amur region, in Yaroslav, in Kaluga, Vorozhnev, and others. This is not regional aberration. Some say that the measures have been blessed by the Kremlin and, of course, the defense ministry, and implemented to varying degrees by region, but always sanctioned from the top, and with a particular emphasis on minorities at the moment. Now, anyone who tries to document this, track it, video it, acquire other third-party footage, will be under investigation. There's one blogger, one former Russian military blogger, so pro-Putin, who is under an FSB investigation. He hasn't been told to stop, but it's been very clear that he can't continue without potential dire consequences. The Interior Ministry, according to some sources, has threatened legal consequences for anyone posting videos of such raids, and the official statement from Penza's Interior Ministry has said that any such publications will be sent to join the SMO. And then, of course, you do see countless videos being circulated on Telegram, on TikTok, on other third-party sites of their women responding to men who are forcibly acquired, chucked in the back of vans, and sent to the front lines. There was a man who was beaten so severely that he died because of his own injuries. This is how Putin implores his defense ministry to conduct their own recruitment. And that's, of course, without getting into the video that went viral yesterday of the drone footage chasing a Ukrainian vendor simply as a human safari. There is no words I can really use sufficiently to describe the way that the Russian government or Putin's regime approaches military doctrine. Now, the reason recruitment has become this desperate is visible in the maths. You know, I like to be substantive on this channel, not just simply making wild claims. I'm an economist after all, but also put it in data. Data is a neutral language which cannot be dismissed or debated over. Simply put, Russia is losing between 30 and 40,000 soldiers every month, be that killed or wounded. The average life expectancy of a new recruit arriving at the front is between 20 and 30 minutes, as was suggested by the CIA Director John Ratcliffe a couple of months ago. So the Ukrainian-Russian casualty, if taken at face value, is 8-1 in the first half of this year. Most wars, it's 3-1 for the defending versus offensive force. The offensive force usually using 3-1 defender of the other side. And this word got out. Tales of abuse inside the Russian military, the suicidal orders, the soldiers killed for refusing to advance, the conditions at the front. These have reached the families of potential recruits, and even the signing bonuses as a year's salary. They have not been enough to sway the considerations of increasing amounts of Russian households. Simply put, Russia needs men, but men are not volunteering. And so the system has switched, as some people have put it, to a method of pure violence and coercion. Now, there is a comparison worth making here as well. Honestly and without evasion, as you know, I like to try to be balanced when I can be. Ukraine has also struggled with forced enlistment. Its own mobilization has been politically contested, publicly criticized, debated in its own parliament and its press, and protested in the streets. The Fedorov protests, as we've seen, are partly rooted in this tension. Ukraine's forced enlistment is a genuine problem that Ukraine is genuinely grappling with in public. Indeed, though, the fact that Ukraine can even make such public protests demonstrates, as I've always said, the difference between the Ukrainian and Russian political systems. This difference is in the system's response. In Ukraine, the argument happens openly. Zelensky is criticized, the generals are fired or swapped around. Streets fill with protesters, even during bombardment. But in Russia, the men filming these raids are threatened by the FSB. They disappear, they fall out of windows. And the Interior Ministry denies anything that is clearly evident. Even those who are in favor of the war, or at least were in the earlier phases. We have to be realistic in recognizing the manpower imbalance here. Russia's population is 140 million versus Ukraine's pre-war of 41 million, 45 million. So this is a recurring issue for Ukraine, but the difference in how it's handled is stark. Now, I want to take a moment to say that I am going to be more active on Substack as well, including unique weekly deeper dives, written deeply dives that you won't see here. Some of the points that I share on the channel here, I will be breaking down further. So if you haven't already, do go and subscribe. It's completely free on my Substack, and you will see unique content there, or expanded content exclusively not available on YouTube. Links in the description and pinned comment. But back to the video. Now, here is where the recruitment crisis connects to something happening simultaneously at the top of Russia's military, as I mentioned before. And why their two stories together tell you something more significant than either one alone, and why I decided to compile them in this video. This week, Putin held a military briefing at the Kremlin. He was flanked by his 2 Russian flags, seated next to the Chief of General Staff Gerasimov and Defense Minister Belousov. He praised his military performance and announced changes to the command and control structure. We are continuing to improve the instructions of the defense ministry in return and in relation in needs and experience of the SMO. That's what he said or inferred, but what those improvements actually consist of is actually something different and worth examining. You see, there's a chap called Colonel General Valery Sodorchuk, who commanded the central troop grouping advancing towards Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, and he has been relieved of his command, actually. His forces got within artillery range of both cities, but failed to breach them for a while. And in a functioning metrocratic military system, a commander who fails to achieve his objectives gets fired. But Solodchuk was not fired. He was given a new command. In the rear, where Ukraine has been making damaging strikes on Russian infrastructure, effectively he's been moved laterally. Reposition, not held accountable, not publicly failed, just quietly shifted to a different role where his underperformance is less visible, sort of like what happened to Shoigu in the earlier phases of the war. In his place, though, Putin has appointed Colonel General Alexander Ivaniev. Not going to get these names right, but there you go. And he has previously led the Vostok grouping, which endured a wave of Ukrainian counterattacks in the southeast. A commander moved from one underperforming front to lead another. Not new blood, therefore, just recycled blood. Additionally, Putin has appointed Colonel General Denis Lyamin as head of a new drone warfare branch, created to address Russia's significant lag between Ukraine's drone technology and innovations. Russia has been trying to recruit drone operators, and it's been failing. Its goal was about 78,000 drone specialists by the end of this year. As of the 6-month target, it has 8,000, on pace for 16,000 out of 78,000. That is just appalling. The appointment of this new general to lead this branch, therefore, doesn't really change the trajectory. Generals do not produce drone operators. Training pipelines and institutional culture produce drone operators. That's what Ukraine is doing, building a military culture around the innovation of asymmetrical warfare and specifically drones. Neither of those can be fixed by a command reshuffle. Indeed, it has been put simply that the Russian military falsely assumes that if they keep grinding their way through the front line, they will eventually achieve their strategic and military objectives. Instead, it has been yielding diminishing returns at a higher cost and with the offensive largely stalled. Yes, there's emphasis by Putinists about pressure on the fortress cities, but it is largely overhyped. Those closer to the front are actually criticizing the army's performance openly, much more commonly. Putin is praising it, but the gap between those two assessments is itself a measure of how far the official narrative has drifted from the operational reality. Now, step back from the specific details and look at what these two stories, these two aspects that I've shared, reveal together. At the bottom of Russia's military system, men are being beaten into signing up because the financial systems have stopped working and the fear of what happens at the front has become greater than the fear of what happens if you refuse. But at the top, commanders are being shuffled sideways rather than being fired because publicly firing them would require acknowledgement that something isn't going well, that it's not working. Both of these are the symptoms of the same structural problem. A system that cannot tell itself the truth, that cannot publicly acknowledge failure at any level, from the Panzer recruitment office to the Kremlin briefing room, because the entire office of the war's justification, edifice of the war's justification, rests on the claim that everything is going to plan. But everything is not going to plan. Russia is making some of the smallest territorial gains since the start of the war. Ukraine has launched successful counterattacks and strike after strike after strike onto oil refineries and military targets. Meanwhile, Putin is sitting in front of his usual setup, pretending that everything's fine, effectively micromanaging the war, but in a way that's only making it worse. One such guy who was actually recruited said the very blunt thing of what he would do if he was mobilized. As soon as I'm given a weapon, he said, I will shoot those who mobilized me. Certainly not what you want to hear from those representing you on the front lines. So what comes next? Now, the mobilization question is the central one. US officials, for what it's worth, say the Kremlin is still weighing up another round of forced mobilization, likely after the September parliamentary elections, as I've noted before, and given Putin's growing backlash. It's a cost for Putin, because if he doesn't mobilize, then he has a manpower shortage, is pretty clear. But on the other hand, if he does, then he has to accept and recognize that the SMO is not going according to plan, which is a lesser worse option. The political risks of full mobilization are significantly higher than they were in his first round 4 years ago. That first round mobilized reservists and men with some military experience, but another round would bring men with little to no experience and likely no willingness to fight, men who have spent 4 years watching what happens to the ones who went before them. So recruiting officers like those in Rostov-on-Don or Penza are already doing informally what formal mobilization would do formally. The difference is deniability. The difference is the ability to point to the official voluntary status of recruitment, while the FSB threatens the people filming what actually happens in those offices. That deniability, the plausible deniability, is becoming harder to maintain. In these videos, the evidence is overwhelming. And in Moscow, Putin just continues to say that everything is going hunky-dory. Russia's voluntary army is therefore not voluntary. It is a command reshuffle of the military, which is not a reform. And the gap between what Putin says at the Kremlin versus what's happening in cities from Penza, Rostov-on-Don, Tatarstan, Vorozhnev, and more is an honest measure of where this war actually stands. The system itself cannot tell itself the truth at any level, cannot fire the generals who fail, and cannot acknowledge the men who refuse to sign up. You can't allow those videos and the public evidence to get out, but it is getting out, and it's becoming harder and harder for the remaining Putinists, especially those outside, to pretend that it is. Indeed, just look at what happened in the past couple of weeks with Laura Loomer and other MAGA supporters. It's a big deal. You can find a video that I talked about that also in the description. But all in all, this is Putin's war in August of 2026. Not what he says, but what's actually happening. And trust me, it's only going to get worse from here. But that's it from me, everyone. Let me know in the comments below what you think. And of course, if you enjoy this, then do drop the video a like. It really helps. It's free. But most of all, do subscribe. We've got some fantastic guests coming up, and growing the community only means that we get more and more in-depth and fruitful conversations, more quality conversations and perspectives, enriched conversations. But we'll see you on the next one. Take care.